Chapter 19. The Man in the Mask. He's still alive, she thought to herself. He has to be. Emma went straight to her bedroom when things had settled inside the safe house. She had chosen the room furthest down the hall, despite Xander's insistence on her being surrounded by the others. He seemed to think her unable to cope without Johnny. She assured him he was fine. Her outburst in the van was believing he was well and truly dead, but Xander had eliminated that dread, pointing out his self-removal theory on Johnny's tracker. Death would have driven her over the edge. Hope was something she could work with. She thought back to all their times in training where Johnny had worked his way out of deadly situations. Aside from Xander shooting him point blank to prove a point, she couldn't remember any moment where Johnny had been shot, or stabbed, or really even wounded. In every scenario he was quick to move, act, or shoot first, always on the front foot when the odds were stacked against him. The more she remembered, the more hope she gathered, and the more confident she became that Johnny was still alive. "He'll probably beat us home," Xander had said. Despite the mess of the day, the disaster of the mission, and still the gut-wrenching pain of losing Liz, Emma plopped back down on her bed with a sense of peace. The room had been decorated as ambiguously as possible. Beige walls, black cabinetry, and a tan bedspread were joined in decoration by vague metal lamps, table weights, and colorless photos of flowers. We could be anywhere, Emma thought, noting the house's complete lack of cynic identity. Like back home, her own bathroom stood attached via a doorway to her right, in which she was thrilled to find not only stocked with soaps and shampoos, but containing a bathtub, a luxury which had eluded her since moving to the residential center. Mere seconds passed between her discovery of the tub and her whipping it open. A large mirror over the sink provided the first look at herself in hours, and Emma was troubled to see how swollen and bloodshot her eyes had become in the time spent crying over Johnny and Liz. She looked unfathomably tired, somehow aged in the half day she'd spent between this place and the hotel. A cloud of sadness washed over her, wishing she had her boyfriend here to reassess her appearance. Still, she looked better than the others. Save for Xander, she alone had arrived at the house absent of blood. Jordan and Margot were covered in their own, and Kent, who still had yet to share exactly what had happened, was coated in a mix of his own, Liz, and the guard who had apparently died after they captured him. Emma was glad to see herself only caked in sweat. She stripped out of her clothes and threw them in the bathroom's empty trash can, hoping to be rid of them forever, then stared once more at the visible fatigue the day had taken on her body. Trying to distract herself from the image she always hated seeing stare back at her, Emma fumbled through the vanity cabinet and perfumed her bath. The first touch of the water was jarring. Goosebumps prickled up her arms. Had she any hair below her neck, Emma imagined it would have stood straight up like a frightened cat. She took a deep breath to calm herself, pushing on to lower her body into the scalding pool, where finally submerged she was able to relax. The last thing to enter the water was her left arm. She had forgotten about the tracker up to that point, and now wondered whether the water would affect or even destroy it. She hoped so. Hypothetically, the overseers back in Juliang and Tylersville could still monitor and violate her privacy, though this was strictly against the law. She doubted even her father would cross that line. She stared at the clothes hanging on the edge of the garbage can, then momentarily considered cutting open her teeth and arm to rid herself entirely of this mission. The faster she could forget Polish and Mandarin, the better. Once they were back in the States, Emma never wanted to think of this place again. Her fake phone was back out on the bed. It would have been early afternoon in the Middle East, easy enough for her to call Riley if he wasn't busy. Her father, even on his heaviest days, would have been asleep or trying. Her mother the same. Andrew was unreachable. The only others she could think of trying were her grandparents back in Corpus Christi, but in addition to the time difference, they were also non-members, and explaining to them the intricacies of the program always required a level of energy she couldn't presently provide. Instead, Emma let herself be alone with her thoughts. Praying that Johnny was safe wherever he was, the heat and humidity of the tub overcame her, and she fell asleep right there in the bath. She dreamt of Johnny. The details of their situation were fuzzy, but she saw them alone in the middle of a forest, surrounded by nothing but trees for miles around. The word sanctuary kept popping through, as if wherever they were was out of reach of any danger which could be pursuing them. The longer the dream went on, the more she wanted to continue. Her inhibitions lacked the accountability she felt when she was awake, and she watched herself spend hours upon hours, days even, living there with Johnny, hunting together, eating together, falling asleep together, each night feeling him hold her tighter than he had before. Then something changed. Dark clouds covered the sky, and each day they came home with less and less food, and the more she wanted to feel Johnny close beside her, the more he seemed to edge away, until finally she woke in their cabin in the woods, unable to find him anywhere. Sprinting into those woods, Johnny was nowhere to be seen, and the louder she called, the louder her voice echoed through the trees, mocking her. She woke with a start, splashing around in the dirty water. The comfort of the heat and bubbles had disappeared in the night. Emma found herself submerged in a freezing tub, her fingers and toes pruned beyond recognition. Details of the dream disappeared as she blinked the sleep out of her eyes, but the feeling of dread at losing Johnny remained, reminding her that this was the second night in a row she had spent without her best friend, the first time in months. Groggily, she kicked her legs over the side and crawled to her feet. Her hair, soaking for hours, had an unusual curl to the end of it. Johnny would think that's funny, she thought, trying to keep her attitude up. Outside in the bedroom, light was peeking through the windows. As her room faced the mountain roughly to the west, she presumed this meant that she had slept late into the morning. Finding no shame in this, given they would be doing nothing for the following several days, she lazily crawled under the unmarked covers, but was unable to fall back asleep. The smell of bacon shot her to attention. Opening her bag for the first time, she was glad to find an arrangement similar to what she would have packed for herself, including an oversized navy sweater and a pair of maroon leggings. A pair of fuzzy gray socks completed the ensemble. Tossing her new curls into a ponytail, Emma traipsed down the hallway, bothered by the silence emanating from the rooms taken by Margot and Jordan. Back home, she could usually hear them watching or arguing over something, but putting her ear up to either door, it was eerily quiet. Maybe they're outside, she conceded. The great room was empty. The only sound in the house came from the kitchen, where she found Xander still in a pair of plaid pajama pants, listening to something intently through a pair of headphones. He saw her approach, putting down the pan and muting his devices. "Morning," he grinned, apparently happy to see another living being. Emma noticed the chunk of red meat bleeding onto a white towel beside him. "Deer?" she wondered aloud. "Woke up a bit early," he admitted. "Decided I shouldn't let your shot go to waste." "I didn't know you knew how to butcher," she replied. "I'm from Nebraska," he japed. "Of course I know how to butcher." She smiled in return, moving to the fridge to see if there was anything she could add to their breakfast. "That was a hell of a shot," he continued. "You ever been hunting before?" "Once," Emma said blindly. "When I was little, my Uncle Mark took us up to North Dakota for pheasants." Xander turned, curious. "Hit anything?" "Andrew and Mark got birds," she admitted. "I've never killed anything before." Xander's grin narrowed. "That makes one of us," he noted. Emma could tell he was curious to share something with her. "Have you?" "I told you, I grew up butchering." He turned back to the stove. "People, I mean," she instigated. He poured out a pile of venison strips on a plate between them. He picked one up, blowing on it, then slowly took a bite. "A few," he claimed. A wave of relief seemed to flush from his face. "How old were you?" He shrugged. "Older than Jordan," he stated. "It was right before my junior year. We were called in sort of last minute at the end of summer to take the place of another squad. Poachers in northern Norway stealing from indigenous Sami herds." Emma took a bite of the bacon, searing her tongue. "Reindeer police?" Essentially," Xander agreed. "We were there to capture them, prepared to use force if necessary, but the Sami hoped our presence would deter them outright, without the need for weapons." "Let me guess," Emma prodded. "They shot you first?" "Not me," Xander admitted. "My buddy Trevor. Took 2 of his fingers clean off the gun, no more than 10 yards away from me." Emma saw the darkness returning to his face. "Easy win?" Xander gave a distracted laugh. "Not for Trevor," he said. "But for me, yeah. 5 shots and 2 were gone. I didn't even have to face them up close." "Well, that's positive, isn't it?" Emma wondered aloud. "First time didn't exactly scar you." "Not technically," he agreed. "But I downed 3 people in the blast." Emma eyed him cautiously. "Trevor?" "No," he continued. "One of the Sami was coming up the ridge to warn us, obviously too late. I didn't recognize my target before I fired." Emma felt her eyes widen. "You killed a civilian?" Xander shook his head. "I didn't kill her," he dissented. "I just shot her in the leg." Emma felt herself sigh with relief. "But you tell me," he added. "Would it have been better if I did? You can't exactly herd nomadically if you can't walk for the rest of your life." Emma scoffed. "What kind of question is that? Of course it's better that she lived." Xander took another bite of meat, leaving his own opinion up in the air. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, then dropped her voice. "Did Jordan kill a civilian?" "I don't think so," he dismissed. I mean, they haven't told me their story yet, but if what they've said so far is true, about them being attacked in the stairwell, then both of his kills are justified." Emma narrowed her eyes. Xander could see her following. "It's Kent's story I'm worried about," he said quietly. "Why?" Emma spat, feeling her breath quicken. "Did something happen to Johnny?" No, not that," Xander sighed. "Nothing he told me changed what we know about Johnny." He peeked his head around the kitchen corner to make sure they were alone. "He's clearly traumatized," Xander went on. "There were significant gaps in his story. I don't think he'll be able to give a full picture until Towsville pieces together the comm feeds." Emma took her own look into the great room. "You think he killed a civilian?" "Not him," Xander shook his head. "And not exactly a civilian. But something he remembered about the situation struck me as odd." Emma froze. "Liz?" Xander's face fell. "The guard she took down," he nodded. "Ken said he was still alive when he left the office. and completely still by the time they heard shots in the stairwell. You think Liz Mercy killed him? Well, that's what the story implies, he agreed. Whatever happened to him, I don't think it was a natural death. Emma looked over the table into Xander's sleep-deprived eyes. Well, what does that prove? She chided. You can't exactly punish her for it, can you? No, he said. But the company can. At that point in the mission, he wasn't a threat, so if she executed him while he was down and that goes on record... Xander scratched his head. Liz's family's already going to be back in court with the company over her death, he explained. We gave a legally binding promise that she'd be kept out of danger. If they take to a judge that she was the sole death in the entire squad, imagine how complicated things get when the company revokes her funeral allowance on the basis of a confessed war crime. Emma scratched her own head, then swore under her breath. You're telling me, Xander seconded. So what are you planning? Emma added, understanding Xander was looking for a trusted set of ears to second his solution. Well, regardless of testimony, the company's going to have the seizure on the comms record. Emma nodded. So, he continued, we coached Kent into changing the story. What if he was the one that took the guard to the ground and accidentally smashed his head too hard? Incidental force resulted in head trauma, which killed him through a seizure. Emma eyed him cautiously. Take Liz out of it completely? If the audio records provide room, we fill it, he issued. Kent takes the technical blame, but none of it results in punishment. Emma grinned. You sure you don't want to be a politician? Xander shook his head. About as much as you do, he disavowed. I'm just trying to fix this mess before it gets dirtier than it already is. Emma took another bite of bacon. So what do you need from me? Xander shrugged. Do you think he'd trust you if you were the one to present it? I could try, she admitted. Give it a day or two, he conceded. Let him sleep off the mission a bit. Emma nodded. How are you doing? Xander continued. Me? She confirmed. Fine, why? He gave no answer, just a stern look that plainly read, Johnny. He's fine, she boasted. I know he's fine. Yeah, I'm sure he is, Xander agreed. But I asked about you. Are you doing okay without him? Her answer was more complicated than a simple yes or no. She could tell Xander knew that. I'll be fine, she argued. I'm more worried about being stuck here for a week. Xander laughed. Touché. How's your wife doing? Xander tossed his empty plate in the sink. She's fine, he noted. Worried about us, but beyond that, everything's fine. She's with her parents in Fort Collins for the week while I'm away, so she shouldn't be too starved for company. And the baby? Xander grinned thoughtfully. He's good. So it is a he! She echoed his expression. What, do you guys have a bet going? Me and Johnny were convinced, she claimed. Margot's obsessed with the idea of you having a little girl. Well, she'll have to wait on that one, he smiled. Baby boy coming this summer. Emma ran around the table and squeezed him. As little as she liked kids, she could see the excitement Xander held about his family and wanted him to feel justified in it. What was Jordan's pick? He asked. Emma let go, returning to the edge of the table. He didn't really have one, she admitted. I don't know that he really processes stuff like that until it happens. Xander looked slightly unnerved. What do you mean process? Emma turned her head to the great room. It's like he doesn't really think ahead much, she explained. Like he can't think of you being a dad this summer because right now you're just a guy with a pregnant wife. Xander continued to raise his eyebrows. So this thing with his mom's got to be killing him, he said. It'd be better if he had some kind of definitive answer, she went on. He's probably taking Johnny being gone harder than I am simply because he doesn't know. Xander rubbed his hand over his chin. And he just killed 2 people, he thought aloud. You think he's okay? You tell me, Emma replied. Did he seem fine this morning? Xander shook his head. He's not up yet. He's not, she repeated confusedly, before dragging her thoughts away. No, you're the first one up, he claimed. I figured I'd let you guys sleep as long as you need to. Sure, she replied blankly. Yeah, you might want to talk to him. She noticed the clock above the oven and counted backwards, realizing there was still time to call home if she hurried. How cold is it outside? Xander shrugged. It's warmer than yesterday, he declared. Should be fine in that for a few minutes. Sweet. I'm going to go call my dad. She missed Xander's reply, running up the stairs to grab the fake phone in her bag. As she passed the middle bedroom, she continued to be distracted by the silence. Service out in the yard wasn't great, but she found the strongest signal in the back garden. Dead plants and flowers were now overtaken by thick vines and brambles, centered around a waterfall wall pushed against the back fence, itself turned off for the season. She figured it was beautiful in the summer and thought of Johnny being with her to share it. Her father picked up immediately. "Em," he breathed hoarsely. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Dad," she assured. "I was out of danger the whole time, just like the plan." She heard him exhale hard over his microphone. "The plan?" he choked. "Yeah, so much for that." "How bad is it?" she asked. "Well, it's not good," he tried for sarcasm. "I just got off the phone with Mountbatten. The Grand Hooks have already filed." Emma felt her heart sink, but for whom she couldn't decide. "What does that mean for you?" she managed. "Well," he grunted. "Best case scenario, we find something proving she was responsible for her own death. We present it in court, and somehow we walk out of it without looking like complete assholes for screwing her family out of any compensation." She heard him take a deep breath. "The most likely scenario is that we lose the case, pay a hefty wrongful death settlement, and hopefully never hear from them again. Although my suspicion is Richmond's already offered them his full backing. If he goes into this thing guns blazing, we not only get settlements, but I might be forced to resign and pray that Daniels keeps the feds out of my file cabinets." Emma found herself pulled to defend her father. "But won't Shane be linked too?" she argued. "What if he's forced out with you?" "Oh, he won't," her father denied. "He's autonomous. Beyond knowing about the mission, he wasn't involved in any of the planning. He knows nothing. Our secrets should be safe with him." "And what if you're gone?" she blurted desperately. "What happens to me?" Her father actually laughed this time. "You do what everyone else does," he explained. "You do your 4 years and go off on whatever else you have planned for your life. Mom and I'll retire somewhere warm, and hopefully that'll be the end of it." "With all our money gone," she croaked, stopping herself before uttering, "with my protection gone." "Emma, relax," he scolded. "That's the worst case scenario. Chances of that are slim to none. The reality is my image will probably take a dramatic hit and the Grand Hooks will get a big payday. I'm already ineligible for re-election in 16, so we go with the original plan of backing down to Richmond for a single term. Shane protects the assets, and we pick right back up in 4 years when he hops back in at the top floor." Emma swallowed hard, trying to find peace in her father's words. "I do want to know, though," he continued. "What happened in there? How did things get screwed up?" "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "It all started with Jordan and Margot." She could imagine his face contorting intently. "What do you mean?" "Oh, they were pulled away from their posts," she recited. "They said they were sabotaged by members of the company." The line went silent for several seconds. "Dad?" she called. "Hello?" "What do you mean members of the company?" "There were 2 of them," Emma explained. "They said one was a man, a fire elementalist, and the other was the Polish ambassador's private secretary. She could vibrate things or something." Again, there was no answer. Emma stood there waiting for her father's voice to return, but there was nothing. "Dad? Can you hear me?" She pulled the device from her ear to check the signal. Everything looked normal. She put it back to her head and waited half a minute more. "Hello?" "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully." His voice returned, concise and punctuative. "As soon as I hang up, you need to clear the call history from that phone and destroy it. Do you understand me?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "Do you understand me?" he repeated. "Clear the history, then destroy the device. Bury it. Chuck it off the mountain. I don't care. Just make sure nobody can ever use it again. Is that clear?" She struggled to find words to respond. What? "Can anyone hear you talking to me?" he raised. "No," she managed. "No, I told Xander I was going outside too, but..." "Good," he stated. "Destroy the phone. Go back inside and tell him there was no signal." But what if he asks about the phone?" she asked manically. "For the love of God," he grunted. "Make something up, Em. Just destroy it and don't try to contact me until I see you back home." "But is that clear?" "Yes," she choked before the line went dead. She stood still, staring at the device in her hand, paralyzed. As soon as the screen returned to the dial screen, she snapped out of it and cleared everything, resetting the phone to factory default, throwing it against the stones where it fell into the pool, then launching it into the trees as far as she could manage. Her heart pounding, she took a hard breath before walking back into the house, where Xander was starting to replace items in the fridge. She sprinted up the stairs again, slamming the door behind her and standing awkwardly over her bed. What just happened? She tried to process. Her father had always kept secrets. Most of the time she and her brothers were blissfully unaware of them. When it came to her faking an effect, he'd warned her about the consequences even if she hadn't understood them at the time. But through it all, he had acted calm and composed, like he was in complete control of the situation. She'd never heard him this manic. The fear in his voice made her desperate to call him back for comfort and clarification, but after his warning she realized even her mother was probably off limits now too. Riley, she thought desperately, before remembering her new lack of communication. She stormed to Margot's door and pounded, loud enough for everyone in the house to hear. "Margot!" she shouted, continuing to pound. Half a minute flew by before she even considered stopping. "Mar, I know you're in there! Open up!" She could hear the bed frame creak, and slowly Margot opened the door, wearing a loose shirt and sweats. Her hair was a disaster. "What do you want?" She froze nervously, blocking Emma from the rest of the room. "I know Jordan's in there," Emma huffed. "I don't care. I need your phone." "Why?" "I need to call Riley." "Use your own." "I can't find it," she explained, not missing a beat. "I can't find it," Margot mimicked, rolling her eyes before slowly closing the door again. "Margot!" Emma yelled, but the door reopened just as quick. "Chill out," Margot scowled. "Here." She held out her own fake phone, which she had evidently just grabbed from her nightstand. "Thanks," Emma sighed. "Whatever," Margot sulked, closing the door in her face. "Leave me alone." Emma shrugged off the dismissal and ran back to her room, frantically dialing Riley's number. There was no answer. She stared at the clock on the phone, realized it was the middle of the night where he was, and swore loudly, chucking the device against her pillow. She felt ready to have a breakdown. Storming into the bathroom, she was desperate to jump in again, calm her nerves the way she had done the night before, but knew at this point it would have no effect. There was zero chance of any alcohol in the safe house, nothing to settle her the way she used to. She stood over the bathroom sink, staring at her bloodshot eyes and looking into herself for some kind of solution. Doubting it very much, she ripped open the vanity cabinet and prayed she might find something to help. Staring at her on the second shelf was an orange pill bottle, wrapped in a layer of masking tape. Her knowledge of written Chinese was just enough to understand the handmade label. For time change. Her mind shot back to Xander handing them the exact same substance back in Juliang. Without second thought, she ripped off the cap and swallowed one whole, then returned to her bedroom, recycling deep breaths to knock herself out even quicker. Trying to fend off the last of her nervous energy, she worked her way through the menu on her room's TV and linked it to the American feed Xander had mentioned the night before. The last thing she remembered were vague football highlights flashing on the screen before her eyes grew heavy, and she blacked out. The pill worked a little too well. Emma found herself face down on top of her covers, breathing in a pool of her own drool. Dried sweat caked her clothes from that morning against her skin. She peeled herself away, struggling to remember any dreams. Margot's phone had disappeared from the other pillow, and she deduced that her friend had been in to retrieve it after Emma failed to answer the door. Without it, there was no clock in the room. The world outside the windows was pitch black. Her anxiety had subsided for the moment. Boiling in her sweatshirt, she was happy to finally hear noise coming from the other bedrooms. Margot's words were still unintelligible through the door. Emma considered knocking and apologizing for earlier, but decided to give her the space she had requested. Xander and Kent both had their doors shut, either watching or having fallen asleep to their screens. She made her way down to the kitchen, starving. Dirty dishes were stacked in the sink, their remnants providing a visual of Xander continuing to carve his way through the animal in the garage. A half-dozen steaks were left thawing in the fridge. As appealing as that sounded, Emma was unmotivated to cook, finding a bag of lettuce and a dozen other ingredients to throw together a salad, tossing it into a bowl, and dousing the mixture with Italian dressing. She almost dropped the bowl when she saw the clock on the microwave. Midnight. Xander said 10 hours, she swore to herself, frustrated by her complete disappearance from the rest of the squad. I'll be up all night now. She stormed into the great room, turning on one of the lamps and dropping hard to a couch. Eating her salad in lonely silence, the thoughts of the earlier phone call returned, followed by her nerves, and the awareness of the stifling temperature in the house. The back garden provided some relief, but the outside air was too far in the opposite direction to feel any comfort, so she resorted to leaving the back door open a crack and tossing a blanket over her shoulders to negate the chill. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling of danger pressing in around her from all sides. By the time she finished her salad, half an hour had passed, during which time she considered swallowing her pride and asking Margot one more time for her phone to call Riley. He had transferred at the semester break to Saudi Arabia, meaning that by now he and Siobhan were safely done with their daily schedule and winding down for the evening. But what would he say? She debated, figuring he would only make things worse by criticizing her for even trusting their father in the first place. She imagined herself getting defensive, fighting Riley over his leaving, as seemed to happen every few months, leading to a week of silence that she didn't think she could handle right now. Thoughts of Liz and her family returned again. She did everything in her power to sympathize with them, especially since this was now 2 for 2 that they had lost to the program. But if they were going to force a situation like this on her own family, when her father had done everything in his power to protect her, then of course Emma was going to pick his side. What other choice did she have? Everyone else was going to be focused on her death, especially Kent. Emma couldn't allow that negativity to drag down her hope for Johnny. If someone was going to stand up and be a beacon in the darkness, it was going to be her. Besides, after what she had said to the rest of them in the van, the only thing Emma worried about Liz was the death of the guard. Beyond that, Liz's death had happened. There was no changing that. Emma took comfort in its definitude. It was Johnny's absence that was killing her most. She could do with him being in danger, with him not being by her side as she fell asleep. But even before they had started dating, she'd grown accustomed to him simply being there, being an extra set of eyes and ears that she could bounce ideas through, and get reassurance in her own worries and speculations. Now she was worried and speculating about him. Without him, it felt like she had lost half of her identity in the process. Emma stood up and looked around the great room. A large bookshelf was stacked high with literature in dozens of different languages. It was still China, so she doubted she could find a Bible anywhere, but a single title in English stood on the shelf at her eye level: The Prince, by Niccolo Machiavelli. Her father had once tasked her to read it, claiming it was one of his favorites, but she had skimmed her way through and pretended to know the plot when he brought it up after. Having nothing better to do, and hoping it might revive some happier thoughts of her father, she pulled it off the shelf and returned to the couch to read through the foreword. A movement outside caught her attention. With the lamp reflecting off the glass, it was difficult to see out the front windows, but she could have sworn that she saw the front gate move back into its shut position. Already on edge, Emma moved toward the front door to get a better view, peering around the sidelights to see the gate secure as it had been since they'd arrived the previous afternoon. The only difference was a lack of sunlight, and a sudden thick fog which appeared to be seeping from the ground. Emma swallowed hard, trying to reassure herself that the fog was normal in the low temperature, but still it was frighteningly heavy, and she hadn't noticed it when she stepped outside in the garden. She could feel her breathing quicken, comforted by the sound of the television still seeping through Xander's bedroom door. Her breath stopped completely when she saw a figure emerge out of the fog. Creeping slowly toward the front door, it seemed to be gliding at the speed of the clouds. Its thin frame was barely visible in a skin-tight suit of black. As it came closer, Emma saw its face covered in a mask, expressionless, with empty holes for eyes and small featureless gap carved in for its mouth. 20 feet away, it recognized Emma in the window, tilting its head in mocking curiosity. Emma hardly found enough breath to squeak out, "Xander?" The noise from his room stayed static, but Emma's eyes remained rooted to the glass where the figure crept ever closer like a snake through the fog, though bizarrely the mist didn't separate around the figure, instead flowing straight through it like a ghost. It stopped 10 feet from the door, once again tilting its head in challenge. Another cry for help failed to materialize. Emma held her breath, eyeing the thing cautiously, hoping beyond reason that it could not see her through the glass if she stayed completely still. As slowly as she could, she moved her eyes down from the mask, trying to get the measure of it, taking in every detail for when it finally disappeared, and she had to describe it to the unbelieving squad. Maybe I'm still asleep, she thought desperately, before looking down to the gravel and feeling her heart stop. A low rattling sound began shaking the house. Through the glass, Emma found the blackened shape of the figure's feet, but instead of the driveway, it stood on lines of a wooden floor, and she suddenly understood why the fog remained unbothered at its approach. Emma had been staring at her reflection. The thing was standing right behind her,